Awesome. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So Natasha, you were just asking about the work of repair when it's more complicated and there's more people involved,
Hmm.
and the blurring of the categories,
Hmm.
perpetrator and victim. So I think the categories of perpetrator and victim that is given to us by the carceral criminal system, and we
Hmm.
know what we know from organizing is in terms of doing any kind of transformational work or liberatory work for a just society, we can't be using strategies and tactics that are oppressive. We won't get liberation from using those tactics. I think Audre Lorde says, right, that master's tools will not be used to dismantle his own house.
Hmm.
Um, and we know, Aaron Daddy Roy and others talk about how we need to envision the world that we want in the organizing that we do together. So in community work, I think about really problematizing even the terms of perpetrator and victim, because that's so carceral. It's so just, criminal oriented. But also, like, just thinking about who has been harmed and what's required for repair. But I think we need to start with the context and always putting things within the political context. Like I said, people are people need to be accountable for their actions. I believe 100% in accountability, but people are not accountable for the context in which those occur. I mean,
Hmm.
poverty, colonization, racism, the fact that there are some folks in our movements who are just enraged, that's not any problem of their synapses or their inability
Hmm.
to contain themselves. It's their outing their rage about the continual violence and against them, that structural violence. We need to think about necropolitics,
Hmm.
work about Mbembe's work about policies that actually kill people. That's the real violence, and the structural violence and strategic abandonment of people. So I think you need to start by, naming the context and the structure. And usually, like in our movements, people have awareness of that.
Hmm.
But you have to start with that because it's in that context that the harm occurs. We got to take a look at that. It's very, like I said, a professor in a university doing something racist to someone is very different than people struggling in social justice movements who enact racism between themselves.
Yeah.
It's different. It is different, and the repair has to be different. So I think this is the big work of transforming. This is why we've got to be engaged in the work of transforming the world.
Hmm.
I don't have, again, I don't have a map,
Yeah.
but I will say that people have, like I said, communities of color, queer communities, communities of refugees, and people who are seen as, quote, illegal people, where we know no one is illegal. Direct action activists, in particular, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, have always been trying to organize ways to deal with harm in collective ways that are not secretive and not punitive and don't involve the police. And there's a lot of not maps, but just general ethics, as I said, for doing those kind of things. You need to have a process. And I think about, if anybody's really interested in this stuff, I think that the Insight, that collective, and then Creative Interventions in the Bay Area, Mimi Kim and Rachel Hertzig's work, they've put a lot of Creative Interventions has a great website that's got a lot of stuff available.
Yeah.
It's been up there for decades. People
Yeah.
have been organizing in these ways and not calling the cops. When we talk in response to Black Lives Matter and calls to defund the police, there have been people who've been working on this. One, communities of struggle, there are always, but
Hmm.
also like really formally, like in really useful ways for decades.
Hmm.
There's so much there for us. So I think the thing is not to look for, I think as a therapist, don't look for therapists. Don't look
Hmm.
for mediators, conflict mediation. Conflict mediation is a really problem. Like there's all kinds of things that are problems to not do. Um,
Yeah.
Conflict mediation is extremely problematic for me because it's apolitical, and you can get called. I often have been called into a situation in an organization or even social service work where there's been harm between workers, and I'm asked to mediate it and it's this lateral process, as if basically two girls just haven't behaved well. Natasha, we got to get one of the mean girls on the playground. We got to get her to apologize. That kind of
Yeah.
thing. When the reality is, one worker's been racist to another.
Mhm.
This is, and so you mutualize the violence when you have mediation conversations often. You know, you use mutualizing language. How did this happen between you girls? You know, this kind of,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
like, we want to be really leery that most of what we're given from psychology can get weaponized against oppressed folks, and it depoliticizes the context. So there's all kinds of caveats about what not to do. What to do? This is a creative force, you know,
Mhm.
and we've all, hopefully all of us have made repair with people. It's a different path every time based on the relationship, the harm, the context. Like I said, how many people have been involved in harm, right?
Mhm.
I'll give you one example, which is you probably know, I worked at WAVA, the Rape Crisis Center.
Mhm.
I left, I was there for 6 years, and I have huge respect for everybody fighting against rape. And I left because they were getting really aligned against trans women and non-binary and gender non-conforming people, but also against sex workers. You know, there's a lot of
Mhm.
language at that time about prostitution and the Canadian government trying to make anti-prostitution laws. And I
Mhm.
couldn't stay because of my connections and my commitments. You know,
Mhm.
within like not a lot of years, WAVA wrote an apology to the sex worker community and an
Mhm.
apology to the non-binary community, to trans women,
Oh.
saying we have been part of harming you.
Yeah.
Find that so heartwarming, you know.
Mhm.
And then I came back to WAVA and I started to work, I started to volunteer to do some solidarity groups in community. I did that for a little while. It just felt, you know what, it repaired something for me, Natasha, to feel that I could go back to WAVA because it mattered to me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're perfect, but for the reasons I left, they'd made repair, you know, and no
Mhm.
one, no place is perfect. But
Yeah.
you know, that was collective harm. And that
Mhm.
was collective accountability. You know,
Yeah.
something I
It's
write a lot
amazing.
about in my work is collective accountability. That's when a harm happens, not to think, oh, who did it and run to blame, but to look collectively, how do we take collective responsibility within our movements and name and repair this, not just with the people who've been harmed. If we've done this, we've probably done it before and we've probably done other things. So like, let's be really, that's what's wrong. Again, with carceral responses and the punishment, you know, the criminal punishment system, the cops. What's wrong
Mhm.
with that is you only get accused of this one action and you're held accountable for that, and then it's over. And that causes more harm, obviously, and it causes harm in the name of trying to do something about harms. But I think these kind of other processes and dialogues with each other allow possibilities for us to think, like, there's no way. I wasn't there when WAVA wrote these apologies, and they were good ones. They weren't perfect, but they were well thought out and considered. And of course, more would be needed later. But they probably did one thing and then shit. How do we apologize to sex workers, but we haven't apologized to non-binary folks and to trans women? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it invites you, accountability invites you to think about, okay, where else have I transgressed? Where else are we collectively required to make repair?
Mhm.
I think there's many examples of this good work going on around us, right?
Yeah.
But it's always a creative process. And again, ethical work is always messy. My PhD research methodology, I call
Mhm.
it a solidarity approach, the
Mhm.
rhizome and messy practice. You know, the rhizome being these interwoven ways that we're all connected. And that's what I think about collective accountability, community repair, community accountability. And then also the other piece of it is, which is very different than the carceral system, looking for how we don't transgress in the future, more than because we're taking one person away and caging them
Mhm.
inhumanly. That's not how you stop harm, caging
Mhm.
a being. Um, Instead, then we need to look at, okay, so like if I at WAVA, then I'd be thinking, okay, so we created harm and we've tried to make repair and we're on that path. We haven't done it, but we're not looking for forgiveness here, but we're looking to repair. That's our job. If there's forgiveness coming, that would be lovely. But that's not, we can't ask a whole oppressed community to do the hard work of forgiving us.
Mhm.
So if we've done this work, um, with sex workers, and then we've done this work to try to make repair and accountability, more an apology, I think, of repair and accountability to the non-binary community, to trans women in particular, and then thinking about who else where else, okay, what else is required of us now? Obviously, it's going to be to Black women, to
Mhm.
racialized women, to Indigenous women. You can see this is kind of this is an unending process until we deliver a just society. And I love some of the accountability conversations that have been happening for the settler community in response to all of the children whose bodies have been recovered. I just heard an Indigenous person talking about how if that repair and making it right, if that takes forever, that would be okay. And I think I take that in as a white settler, but I also take that in as a person who may have harmed sex workers, as a cisgender person who may have been, and I was collectively connected with the harm to trans women. It's why I had to leave, but it wasn't enough to just go. I also have to work to, so just thinking about what is a lifetime of work or repair, and to not see that as some kind of burden that at the end of it, you get this gift of forgiveness, that I get to live in a more just world.
Yeah.
My great nieces and nephews will benefit from this. Will benefit from a world in which they are offered more maps for accountability than I was offered. Which was just punishment and apology. And the imperative on me, especially as a young woman, to forgive.
Yeah.
And being told you were hateful and hurtful and mean-spirited and cruel because you wouldn't forgive someone when they did none of the work of repair and just were willing to name it, and then all the work was demanding that you apologize publicly. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is forgiveness for? What's its value and potential? You've already sort of started answering this.
I think when forgiveness is weaponized, it's always to keep repair, to stop repair, to stop accountability, but also to stop transformation of our societies, right? Like that, the imperative to forgive as young women in particular stops us fighting rape culture and stops us from the creation of a consent culture which benefits everybody. Like that's the real cost of the weaponization of forgiveness. But I also feel for some people, as a therapist, I know this. I've worked with survivors of torture, right? I've worked with people who are refugees, who are survivors of political violence and torture. For some of them, they wanted to forgive the people who'd harmed them. And I had my own political ideas about that. I was like, I am not helping you do this. And then I thought, oh, Vikki Reynolds, when did you decide what someone needs to do to get well? These guys are trying to stay on the planet. And so, you know what, they did the hard work of forgiveness in the absence of any accountability from the people who perpetrated the harm.
Wow.
And because I'll give you one example. I was seeing a guy who was a political activist. He was a communist. He was a direct action activist. He had risked everything, his family, his job, and everything, and ended up going to jail and was tortured for his political work and his actions. He was tortured by people. And he escaped and he got to Canada. He saw me. He needed to forgive those people because of his own political analysis, which said that they were also just workers who were exploited, who were required to do these things. And he could see the whole context of how someone could walk into that room as a torturer and harm him. They had no relationship to him. They didn't dislike him. They weren't good or bad people. He didn't see them as people. He saw them as like, his thing was, this guy, if he continued to think of this torturer as his Satan, as his devil, that he was letting the oppressive state apparatus off the hook. That it was all just about this one guy. But actually, who does that let off the hook, right?
Yeah.
I can see really similarly a man who's enacted rape. I could see someone thinking, I don't want to just hate him forever. I want to hold rape culture up. I want to hold up, the prison industrial complex, which gets most of the money for violence against women, goes to the cops and does nothing to keep us safer. I want to hold that. Like, I don't want to just, so my forgiveness might make space for me to hold more accountability. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can see scenarios and I have been in them, but I will tell you that I scrutinize that with people to make sure that they're not just doing that, that we're not falling into a trap that, they've been watching popular psychology on the media. And the things you do, these are the steps you do to get, and then, if I don't ever forgive, that the indoctrination and really harmful media messages and other messages socially given as part of a misogynist culture To
Mhm.
all genders get it though, that if you don't forgive, you're a hateful bitch. And that
Yeah.
you're gonna pay forever. You know, I do think we've got to investigate and make sure that's not the motivation, that people have these other ideas about what forgiveness might give them, you know.
Mhm.
And there can be a lightness and there can be ceremony and ritual around that opens people up to be more alive. Like if that's what people, you know, the whole point is to be centering the person who's harmed
Yeah.
and not burdening them with forgiveness, the
Mhm.
lack of forgiveness, right? And not requiring them to do anything. They're not
Yeah.
required to do anything, right?
Mhm.
And the work that they choose to do to get back in their life, that is autonomous, you know, that we're within the ethical principles of autonomy. Yeah.
Yeah. Just two more questions that are open-ended. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned about forgiveness doing the work that you do?
I think the biggest lesson has been how it's weaponized.
Yeah.
It is absolutely heartbreaking and devastating, actually, to be with so many young women who they get to have help from me because they're being called drug addicts. They
Yeah.
get involved in the carceral system. They have their babies apprehended. You know, they are harmed in so many ways. And yet they are informed by social workers, probation officers, family members, all these other things that they are required to forgive.
Mhm.
You know, and that they come to therapy doing everybody else's work. And just
Yeah.
the load that is carried by oppressed people.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've learned about forgiveness that's tough, right? But the
Yeah.
other thing I would say is, like, because it's lovely to just speak about that one man who was a survivor of torture. That, you know, Natasha, that experience humbled me. I wasn't willing to forgive any torturer. That's
Yeah.
and it's not that I lost track of their humanity. It's not that I don't have a political analysis. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
I realize that you know, again, in terms of abuses of power, I could have easily wielded my PhD and my psychological knowing and my being a world trauma expert onto this guy to stop him from doing that, and it was absolutely liberatory for him.
Yeah.
So I think what I've learned about forgive, and I would say in my own life, I mean, I'm 60, I'm 61 now.
Mhm.
I have moved to forgiveness from people who haven't done the hard work to do,
Mhm.
but because I didn't want to be angry anymore.
Mhm.
And it was good. And it was good.
Yeah.
But it didn't change anything because people don't do the work. It's not a transformative forgiveness. You know, but
Yeah.
forgiveness that is tied to accountability and people having done the work, then you can be, you know, you can forgive with an open heart, thinking I'm actually part of transformation of the world.
Yeah.
But I don't want to judge people who do this as because they personally want that. They can have that. But there's
Yeah.
also, you know, if we're part of a larger process that's really transformational, that's really something to celebrate.
Yeah. So it was possible for you to get to the lightness without the gaslighting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I was gaslit for decades first, right?
Yeah.
And I did go to bad therapy, like many of us.
Yeah.
A help
Yeah.
that didn't help, and I was like, not what I'm here for.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one of the goals was kind of forgiveness. Like, we're going to get to a place where this doesn't run you or something like that. I was like, I'm not so sure about that. That's
Yeah.
like I said about forgiving and forgetting.
Yeah.
Warren Hill saying, I will forgive, but I will never forget.
Never
I
forget.
have, I have forgiven, but I've never forgotten, because that's all of my resistance knowledges
Mhm.
that keep me safe and that help keep people collectively safe.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah, we don't.
lost? What is lost with forgiveness? What is the cost of forgiveness
Yeah.
to our wider project of justice? Like, we've got
Mhm.
to make sure that the real work is being done so that that forgiveness doesn't ever happen at the cost of moving in a just way.
Yeah. And then the last question is just up to you. Is there anything else you'd like to say about forgiveness?
Always a great question, isn't it? I feel like I've talked you off.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was a great conversation. Oh, I actually feel less sick now.
Oh, good. Well, I hope this is useful to you, and I'll send
Yeah,
you the videos, and you can send me anything you write. And
I will. Thank you so much for saving the day and yeah, helping coordinate. What a disaster.
oh no,
Uh,
this wasn't disastrous at all. If you're
okay.
okay with it, I might hold on to this video and watch it myself, and then
Yeah.
think about if there's something we might do in it. But
Yeah, of course.
I really appreciate you contacting me about this stuff, and
Oh, I appreciate you being on board.
okay, and respect for all the work you're doing and shouldering that.
Oh,
Take care. Take care
you
of yourself.
too.
Bye now.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye.